So I want to start off with a little riddle. Which of these statements is true? Chocolate is good for me.
Chocolate is.
Yep.
Chocolate is bad for me.
Both are. What kind of chocolate?
Both are. Yes. Right. It depends. It depends. You're asking what kind of chocolate. Is it cacao? It depends. Right? That's a good answer. Actually, it's not a good answer. Went on a date once and a girl asked me if I wore boxers or briefs. And I said, depends. Didn't go too far after that. Anybody here into secretions? Yeah.
Yes.
Secretions? Yeah. I mean, some people are into tattoos or body modification, scarification, that kind. Some people are into secretions, right?
We're all into secretions.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Or excretions.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got a friend, every time there's an excretion, I get to hear about it. It's like, time to celebrate, Another one down. So anybody know the difference between secretions and excretions? Technically, there's really no difference. They're the same. It's a movement from one place to another. It's the same answer. Depends. Depends on what kind of movement it is. If it's something that you're trying to get rid of, it's generally considered an excretion. If it's something that's just moving from one place in the body to be utilized in a different way, then that could be considered a secretion. But what's that all about? What are secretions and excretions about?
Inner and outer.
What's their end game? Yeah, why we got to deal with this stuff on the 3D level? Another word being accretion. Accretion. Anybody know the definition of accretion?
What is building?
Right. Right. It's accruing something. It's building something up. It's the growth or an enlargement of something. Building up through this process of things being secreted in and things being secreted out in this fluidity of action that's taking place on multiple levels. It's all part of what's considered the metabolic process. And there's another interesting word, metabolic. Comes from the same root ball, the word ball and ballic. It means to be thrown from one place to another. There's this back and forth that's going on. Same with secretion and excretion and accretion. There's this movement back and forth. It's duality taking place. And within that metabolic process, there's catabolic and anabolic. So anabolic is this building up of things, and the catabolic is the breaking down of things, which leads to accretion, leads to the growth and development of something. And tonight the theme is nutrition and diet from a spiritual science perspective. So it might be a little bit different than what you are expecting. We are going to talk about food and nutrition and things like that. But the beauty of spiritual science is it does bring in different perspectives to consider that can be very helpful to contextualize things and then give you kind of better direction from the periphery. Rather than saying, you ought to take this vitamin. It's like, well, what's the end game? What is going on here? And understanding that can help you in your choices. So, from a spiritual science perspective, you could say that the accretion of form, the building up of form, which we're all in forms right now, is due to the secretion of spirit. I love that concept, that spirit has secreted itself into matter. You can all go home now and just contemplate that for the rest of the night. And that word secrete, it's also secret. But it's got secret in it. So it's like spirit is hiding itself in matter. Now you can all go home and think about that one. Right. That spirit has crystallized through this process of accretion into matter, into form. And therefore, when we talk about the foundation of life, some people talk, like the foundation of life is soil, right? It's the bedrock that everything grows up from the soil. But where did the soil come from? The soil really is this crystallization of spirit that has secreted itself into matter. So we're going to think in terms of two foundations here. There's two foundations to life. Because we live in the university of duality. So everything's duality. We're running into duality all the time. And we need to think in terms of duality to really navigate this life we exist in that stands between the one foundation and the other. So you as a spiritual being, you could say that you've been secreted out of the spiritual world into a physical body. You're secreted. You're hiding in a physical body. And a lot of people don't even know that. They go, oh, I'm just a physical body. Well, the secret is that your spirit is hiding in the physical body. And then at the end of your life, what happens?
You're executed.
Yes.
It just begins.
Out you go, like a toothpaste tube that's spent. Boing. Back into spirit. In the form,
Just begins.
your spirit goes to its foundation and your physical body goes to its foundation. Yeah. Same thing happens really on a daily basis. Because we go through a mini death every day. Right? At the end of in the morning, you're secreted into your little shoebox body. You live your day. And then at the end of the day, you get in your bed and you're excreted out of the body, back into spirit.
Do you think that's many people stay in their body when they're dreaming, even though that most time can expand out?
Dreaming?
Yeah.
Well, dreaming is the in-between state of the duality. It's the threshold. The dream world, the dreamscape is the threshold between the two worlds. And yeah, there's stuff passing back and forth on that threshold. Actually, you're right on. That's great. You're giving me a sign that I'm on the right track here with what I queued up already today.
Just keeping you in line.
That's right. You're keeping me in line here. Yeah.
Keep up with it.
Well, before we talk about the human, let's look at this idea of how this world that we live in, all the forms that have arisen, is the secretion of spirit into matter, seeking different forms into which it can secret itself. It can live, it can exist, it can be consciousness that's happening on the ground. And so the evolution we know of, as science tells us, the mineral world originally, and then the plant world, and then the animal world, and the human. That it's been a long, actually I was thinking about this, I was going to say it's been a long process, but maybe it's not that long from a certain relative viewpoint. Evolution hasn't been that long. That from the beginning it's been this consciousness, that the spiritual consciousness that has excreted itself into forms, the mineral world, the plant world, the human world, looking for a vehicle. Why? What is the central thread to these different vehicles that have arisen as life forms. In a word, antennas. Antennas. Everything has an antenna nature to it. We know that in the mineral kingdom. Minerals have that conductivity. These crystal bowls are fantastic examples of transceivers. They transmit through vibration. And they also receive. They receive your vibration. The bowls will play depending on what's around them. So we know that crystals have been used in radio sets and all sorts of things in science is using crystals as antennas. I was in Mexico over the holidays in December and visited a site there in Chichoban, one of the Mayan ruins, but I don't like to call them ruins. Actually, I don't use that word because they are actually active antennas. Piles of rocks. My gosh, it's just so awesome. The numbers of rocks. I wonder if anybody ever counted the numbers of rocks that built these antennas, because they're not hollow inside. They're massive things just built up of rocks and so high. And they got buried over the centuries, but they've been unburied and restored and acting as antennas. And they're different antennas dedicated to different planetary sources, which we'll talk about a bit more in a second here. There was one to the sun, one to the moon, there was another one to Venus. They're antennas to the larger cosmological system that we're a part of. And this is where spiritual science expands our awareness of what's going on, is that we're part of a larger system. We call it the solar system. Well, there's a sun, but there's a lot more than just the sun. It's kind of like the planetary hood. All these planets are hanging out in this hood of the universe. And we on Earth here, where life is growing and consciousness is growing, our ancestors built these antennas to connect us to higher forces, higher frequencies that send information to us, and potentially we can send information back to them. Let's look at the plant kingdom. Seems quite obvious. There's an antenna-like quality to plants, the flowers, the trees. Got that pillar-like thing that are receiving influences from the planets. We know the sun for sure, and the moon, but all the planets are emitting sound. Someone was telling me today that they've recorded the sounds of the planets. Who is that?
With the sun. Yeah.
The sounds of the sun and
all the other planets, all the frequencies.
Yeah.
And then the frequency of the sun is the Om.
And that's what antennas do. Your car antenna is picking up sound, so you can listen to music on your car radio. And our ancestors referred to the planets as the gods. They were gods sending transmissions down to Earth, guiding us in the development of form that would be able to incarnate consciousness. Then the animal kingdom. What about the antenna-ness of animals? Definitely.
They're horns.
Their horns. Yeah, we'll get into that when I'm going to do a talk on biodynamic agriculture and how cow horns are used.
And the whiskers. Whiskers of what's the
Whiskers of cats.
Their senses of their ultra senses, you know, they have like really heightened senses.
Like for navigations.
Yeah.
Like heightened sense of sight, heightened sense of hearing, smell.
Yeah, these are psychic senses that are picking up transmissions that are beyond what the ear can hear and the eye can see, and so forth. Birds' beaks, migratory birds' beaks have magnetite in them that allows them to navigate the electromagnetic field of the earth.
Same with bees, actually.
Yeah.
Bees' wings are magnetic.
Really? Wow. Yeah, schools of fish under the water. See that there's something psychic being transmitted between them. Somehow they are antenna receptors of the field that is around them. So yeah, they've had this long before GPS ever came along.
Dolphins and sonar.
Nonsense.
They've got built-in GPS, but so do humans. In fact, our chakra system is like satellites, satellite dishes that are transceivers. They receive and they transmit information. And we are the latest iteration of an antenna on Earth. We are an extension of the Earth's intelligence to take up from the Earth its intelligence and bring down from the planetary hood the different intelligences, the different signals, the different guidance systems that are sent to us. We stand here as a weaving between the above and the below. And that's why in the opening meditation, we started at the center, at the heart chakra, and moved to the left, to the right, in the circle, to strengthen the circle. And then we invited from above something to come down into the circle, something up from below into the circle. It's this weaving that I've been studying and learning about in Tantra. Tantra actually means weaving, of duality. And as a human being, we stand between the weaving of the earth as an extension of its intelligence and also weaving of the cosmos. Because we're also a product of their work, their efforts. And we're the latest iteration of intelligent antennas. And this is something it's not so much a physical thing, it's really in our subtle bodies, as I mentioned, the chakras, which are in our etheric body, is what allows us to tune in to these other frequencies. And our Atlantean ancestors had that capacity to a larger degree than we do now. Quinn was asking about, people in the past, how they function. The Atlanteans, their etheric body was actually not as incarnated in the physical, and so the etheric head was above the physical head. It protruded out of the physical head. And so they could communicate with the etheric world. They could communicate with nature. They could communicate with animals directly from etheric body to etheric body. But as we've incarnated, we've descended more down into matter. And that's been an evolutionary imperative, that we materialize more. Because that's been the grand arc from the beginning. We've started out as just warmth. The cosmos was one big ball of warmth that was as big as the orbit of Saturn.
We've actually devolved instead of evolved.
Or we're involving, really, is what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're continuing to involve ourselves into matter. And that's why the etheric head doesn't stick out, and we've lost our psychic abilities. We've lost our abilities as antennas to receive information and transmit information because of this materialization that's taken place. But as I say, that's an evolutionary imperative to do that because we're developing ourselves as ego beings. The separateness that's taken place from the cosmos and from the earth is actually necessary to develop as an individual ego being that has freedom of will and freedom to love freely, ultimately. So we're more enskulled. We're more enskulled in this state of evolution. And I want to touch on alcohol. We're starting to move slowly into the thing about dietary stuff, and I talked about alcohol in our previous talk just before Christmas, when everybody was going off to drink alcohol. I sort of dropped the bomb and said, well, alcohol has a certain effect on the system that was useful at an earlier stage in evolution, where we wanted to materialize more, we wanted to disconnect from the higher heights, and we wanted to come down into our bodies more. And the power of alcohol can do that, because alcohol is a potentized spirit. It's a plant spirit, and it's potentized, and when you ingest alcohol, it'll actually eclipse your own spirit. That's why when you go to the bar and somebody's like kind of sloshing that, you just, it's just the alcohol talking. Well, it is. It's just the alcohol talking. It's not really that person's personality. The personality's been sublimated by the alcohol, and that was good at a time. They was used in initiation ceremonies back in Mesopotamia and the Sumerian times, and the Egyptians used it because they wanted to kind of smash out the personality of the initiate and imprint something new there, so they would become like almost instantly enlightened. So the alcohol was used to disconnect them from their own spirit and allow something else to be stamped in them. Now, unfortunately, the whole relationship and romance with alcohol has continued to grow, and that was, the Greeks and the Romans, they took it to another level with the development of wine and so forth. So now, like, Italian wine is like the ultimate, right? Wine from Italy. So alcohol does have its place, right? We use it as something to anesthetize and sterilize and preserve. But in fact, our body produces alcohol naturally. The intestines produces alcohol in the right amount, the perfect amount, to help just to balance out the putrefaction process that's going on in the intestines. So it will produce the right amount. When we add alcohol from the outside, it's actually throwing that out of balance. So, there's a physical impact that's there. And people that develop alcoholism, what's happening is it's the liver becomes greedy for alcohol. And it produces this craving for alcohol. At least that's one of the causes of alcoholism. So, yeah, it brings us really, alcohol's not something that supports spiritual development in this day and age as it did at one time. It actually takes us back more to the level of consciousness of a mineral or a plant, or maybe an animal, right? Because the mineral kingdom, their level of consciousness was kind of like trance state. Like, rocks are there, like there's a certain consciousness there, but it's like comparable to a trance state. A mineral is more like a sleep. It's like an unconsciousness. Plants are like in a trance state. Animals are really the same level of dreaming. They're kind of at the level of dreaming as what a human has. They're not awake. They're self-aware to a certain point based on their survival instincts. But it's the human that now is striving to become awake and to come awake to our antenna type qualities. So back to secretions and excretions, and to talk about what is necessary in our nutritional life that's going to produce accretion, growth and development, to make us the best intelligent antenna, right? Because when you're an intelligent antenna, then you are the intelligence of the earth, and you are receiving the intelligence of the cosmos to guide you. That's the guidance system that you need. And that's the bottom line, really, when it comes to deciding what you need to be putting in your body. It's going to feed your body, it's going to feed your etheric body, your astral body, and create that form that's going to allow consciousness to inhabit it. So, and looking at that, humans are composites of everything that's gone before. We have the mineral kingdom in us, we have the plant kingdom in us, we have the animal kingdom in us. Right? We can see our physical body is made of minerals. It's made of the dust of the ground. It's got this plant quality because it's growing. If it didn't have the same thing as a plant has, it would just be a dead corpse, right? So it's this life body, this etheric body, this plant body, this growth body that makes the mineral body alive and growing and reproducing, right? Because plants reproduce. Minerals don't reproduce. Plant is the first stage where reproduction comes in. So we're a composite of the mineral world, we're a composite of the plant world, and of course we're a composite of the animal world too. We have animal instincts. We have a body that's what they call a hairless ape, right? We look at orangutans and gorillas and whatnot, we can see, yeah, we're just kind of a little bit further down the evolutionary road from these guys.
Just a bit.
Hmm?
Just a bit.
Just a bit. Mm-hmm.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. But this is where we have to remember the two foundations. There's this growing up from the mineral, the plant, the animal, right? There's this ascent. But then there's, in the realm of duality, there's a descent. There's something that's coming down. There's something that's carrying us from the past, and there's something that's calling us from the future. And it's this antenna-ness that's going to allow us to tune into the future and the right steps to get there in terms of diet, nutrition, and whatever practices you have in your life. Because there's no prescription one-size-fits-all for diet and nutrition anymore. There's no like sitting down at the family table and eating the family meal that mom makes and that it's going to fit everybody. No. We're becoming so individualized that to do that is actually a problem. And it creates problems for people. To try and eat the way the family does, the ancestors does, the way the tribe does. The tribe vibe doesn't cut it anymore. We've become so individualized that we have to find our own personal path into diet and nutrition day by day. Good question. Yeah. Well, in the realm of duality, there has to be opposition. You know, I think Darwin would probably be the first one you go to for an answer on that. You know, you're talking about the game on planet Earth, you know, survival of the fittest. Like, that's not what we're looking at here, but, you know, in terms of physical progression, there has to be opposition, right? So, you know, any kind of pathogen is there to test the physical vehicle to see that it's the strongest vehicle for consciousness.
As if to initiate us from within.
Exactly.
Adapt.
Right, and that's why my talk just before this was about spiritual initiation, spiritual tests and trials that challenge our spirit. So, because there's two foundations, and we have to test the physical foundation and we have to test the spiritual foundation and see what can arise in terms of intelligent antennas in the middle. Yes, sir.
So viruses basically they speed up and accelerate our growth.
Or take us down.
One, two,
Yeah.
Adaptability, overcome.
You know,
One or the other.
you know, do not pass go, excarnate and come back again in a few hundred years.
Gotta sit in jail for a little while.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you got to go to Kamaloka
yeah.
and think about it. So, the reason I'm talking about how, you know, we're composites of these earlier life forms, the mineral, the plant, and the animal, is because we stand upon their shoulders, right? And so, you know, plants absorb the minerals from the mineral world. That's their nourishment. That's, you know, where they get their substance from. And then animals consume plants. An animal can't eat directly the soil the way a plant can. It can't metabolize soil. So they eat plants that have metabolized soil. And they live off of that. And some animals eat other animals.
Some plants eat animals.
Hmm?
And some plants eat
And
animals.
some plants eat animals. Yeah, there's this synergistic relationship, which is so beautiful, like how everything's connected and interwoven. And then so we're humans on this trajectory. We can't eat soil either.
You can, it doesn't taste good.
Well, yes, we can eat salt. Very good point. Yeah.
Clay
Pardon me?
and clay. People eat clay too.
Clay?
Ben makes that.
Yeah. So I mean, this is the beauty of the human being, that we have this incredible range of capability that we could eat. Yeah, we eat salt for sure. Thank you for pointing that out. We're going to come to salt in a minute here. But then we have the plant world we can rely on. And not all plants, you know. Some are good, some will kill you, some will make you high, some will take you down. You know, so you have to have that intelligent antenna on and working. And then we also have the ability to eat animals, the way other animals eat animals. And we have, you know, the teeth. We've got the range of teeth that allows us to eat animals if we choose to eat animals, if we need to eat animals. And we eat them, and then we excrete them. And there's something magical metabolic level that's going on here to consume these other life forms, take in their substance, to transform it into energy, and then excrete something out. The word for that is redemption. We're actually redeeming these other life forms by consuming them. And I know on one level it looks really wild, you know, like to take an animal and to kill it, or to take a plant even and to masticate the life out of it. It's pretty brutal looking. But that's only half the picture. That's the Maya. Maya is the illusion that the Hindu religion talks about, that, you know, there's a veil of illusion there. What's going on behind the veil is a different story than just this kind of brutal thing where a fox catches a rabbit by the neck and brutally murders it. Well, if the fox didn't catch a rabbit, he wasn't not going to survive, and evolution wouldn't go on. So it's kind of an arrangement, a temporary arrangement that's going on in this evolutionary story, where there's a destructive element that needs to take place in order for life and consciousness to progress and find the forms that it can inhabit. And behind the veil, there's actually an agreement between these life forms. If you peek behind the veil, you'd actually see the rabbit and the fox shaking hands and going, okay, all right, we'll meet you at 4 o'clock down to the path there by the
We're
tree.
gonna become one.
And we will become one. Yeah. And, you know, there's this redemption that's taking place in the drama of existence, to survive, to, you know, eat or be eaten. And, you know, from a Darwinian perspective, we can understand what's going on. But from a spiritual science perspective, there's this bigger picture that I'm trying to unpack here. That the sacrifices that these lower kingdoms have made is just a temporary thing. That, in fact, you could say that they are us. That we were them. We were the mineral kingdom. We were behind the mineral kingdom at one point. We went through a plant stage in evolution. We were animals And I'm talking really from the spiritual science perspective, where there's been these steps up in the life forms and producing the human, and how not only do we, kind of in an unconscious way, consume these things and excrete them and grow, but sometime in the future we are going to redeem all these lower life forms by helping them to evolve through the consciousness that we have mastered. And this is quite distant future, that we're going to learn how to transmute matter. We're going to bring the animals to a higher level of consciousness and form, plants and minerals. Everything's going to step up. But right now, they are us that held back in kind of a sacrificial gesture to allow us to stand on their shoulders so we could achieve higher stages of consciousness. The Taoists, they really, they understood this. I've studied a bit of Taoism, and they understand this whole thing about how something has come down from spirit into matter and is seeking to go back up to spirit, to be re-spiritualized. Which is what we're doing every time you have a hamburger or a milkshake or what have you. You're taking something that's really from a spiritual origin, you're breaking it down, you're turning it into energy and then the stuff you excrete, and you're re-spiritualizing it. The question is, how can we do that more consciously? In the Taoist tradition, they talk about the three treasures. The three treasures being the Jing, the Qi, and the Shen. And this ties into the Tantra as well. The Jing being the sexual essence found in the sexual fluids. The Qi being the energy that can be derived out of that bodily fluid. And then the third treasure is Shen, which could be translated as consciousness or spirit. And so through Taoist discipline or tantric practices, it's really about taking the sexual essence in the fluids, and through the practices, raising it to a higher level of being. Qi, to use it for energy, for vitality, longevity, health and well-being. But even further, to elevate it to Shen. So it is, in a sense, spirit. You've taken something physical and you've turned it back into spirit, consciously. So, yeah, this thing around the sperm and the ovum, they're more than just a seed and an egg for reproduction on a physical level. Like, that's what's going on. Like, you can live it at that level, go out and have a family, reproduce, or you can tap into that, the forces behind those. Use it for your energy, use it for ultimately spirit. Now, of course, the scientists, they have a hard time with this because they don't look at anything beyond matter, right? And that's what's the matter with science. Is they don't look beyond matter. Yeah, and they want proof. They're saying in society, you gotta have proof. They want proof because they live within this scientific methodology that demands proof and repeatable experiments and whatnot. And science is great. It's helped us to develop this objective consciousness, which is part of our antenna nature. The antenna nature has to have this objective consciousness as well as the subjective consciousness. But I read an interesting article, the December version of National Geographic caught my eye, on the front cover saying, healing power of faith. So about the magazine, and the article was called Unlocking the Healing Power of You. Science is showing that how you feel isn't just about what you eat or do or think. It's about what you believe. And the article was largely about the placebo effect and how people are given, sugar pills and told that this is medication that's going to fix this or treat this, and they believe it. They have faith in what the authority of the doctor has said, and they actually experience healing. They experience some sort of cure. And what was even more amazing in the article was how they're doing placebo surgeries. They take people into the surgical room, they put them under, they do a little thing, causes a little scar, a little indentation, things like that. And they come out and they think they've had surgery performed on their brain.
And they're all better now.
And they get better.
Oh my goodness.
And the tumors shrink.
Wow.
So, I want to play something around that.
I mean,
Instead of singing, you gotta have proof, 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 we're gonna listen to this. In fact, we're gonna get up and dance to it. And then we're gonna take a break. Gonna get that jing up the cheek.
Cause I gotta have faith.
Alright, now you gotta take that chi up the chin. That's it. Hear it.
Cause I gotta have faith.
Gotta have what? Now we're getting into the practical side of the evening, and my apologies if it seems like I'm taking a roundabout route to come to these things, but that's the nature of spiritual science, and that's why I love spiritual science. Is it opens up the big picture, it brings in other concepts and ideas around things, and before we get into more of the practical aspect, I just want to say one of the reasons I've been harping on this thing about the antenna transceiver-like nature of Earth and all life forms on it is because we're under attack. From a spiritual perspective, yeah, we're under attack from counter-evolutionary forces that are also working with the antenna-like nature of things on this planet. And just going to make a little reference to where that's coming from. Here's a book, very interesting book. It's become kind of a classic in this genre, called Chemtrails, HARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. And this thing, HARP, is a facility. HARP stands for High Frequency Active Oral Research Program, that set up by the U.S. military, exists up in Alaska, and now there's many similar facilities around the planet. Who's heard of HARP? Okay, a lot of people have. Where they are using the antenna nature of the sky, and with these arrays set up in Alaska, they're sending up signals, high-powered radio frequency signals that excite the ionosphere. And it's done under the premise of, just research, exploring, what can be done in terms of weather engineering, geoengineering. But when you look into these things, the rabbit hole gets a whole lot deeper, and these kinds of instruments can be used, not only weather wars, but just, war in general. And I went down this rabbit hole, kind of dragged down in 2012. 2012 was the year that the world was going to end. The world did end for me, as I knew it at that time, when I got struck with something called Morgellons. And I won't go into a long story about that. And if you're going to go look it up on the internet, I warn you, there's like all sorts of crazy stuff out there. It's as the internet goes. But the long and short of it is that Morgellons is the result of military engineered bacteria fused with nanotechnology that gets into your body, as it did to me through an insect bite, because it's in the atmosphere. It's been released into the atmosphere. And this bacteria builds antennas, mini nano antennas in your body to capitalize and hijack the antenna nature of the human being that's already there. But these nanobots that get into the bacteria then assemble themselves and reproduce themselves using the heavy metals that are in the environment. And trust me, we're all loaded with heavy metals in today's world. So there's lots of materials there for these things to construct these mini antennas. And then facilities like HARP, when they're amped up, can, supposedly to bombard the ionosphere, which they do, and they control weather fronts, and it's contributing to some of this crazy weather we've got, could also dominate the consciousness of human beings. So there is definitely what Graham Hancock calls a war on consciousness, and this is just one of the fronts. This is the main front. If they can control you as the antenna that you are, an antenna of the earth, then they've got you. They're controlling the mind. And when they control your mind, they control you. Jesse.
How did you come to the conclusion that you had the nanotech? Like, how did you diagnose yourself in such a way?
Because I had wires growing out of my skin. And I had electrical surges going through my body. I had all the symptoms that people have of the itching and crawling beneath the surface of the skin. And then I didn't know what it was. I thought I had mites. I thought I had scabies. I finally saw a website that says, you don't have scabies, my friend, you've got Morgellons. So I started to research Googling Morgellons, and that took me down this deep rabbit hole that led to reading books like this on chemtrails, HARP, and the full spectrum dominance of planet Earth. And she's about to come out with another book this spring called The Space Fence. That Star Wars program that we thought was put, to rest is not at rest, but there is a space fence being built around the Earth. You want to talk about surveillance?
Consciousness grid.
It's going to have surveillance right down to your DNA. Yeah. You can look up this woman, Alana Freeland.
There's a Facebook page, Chemtrail Girls too.
Yeah, there's some great YouTube video interviews with her, and she's a spiritual science. Discovered that she's into Steiner and anthroposophy, and she's like taking this on with full Michaelic force to reveal this stuff to people. And it's really a weird scenario, and it raises a lot of questions. But the more I've researched this and gone through my own experience, it's like, yeah. There's, we're face to face with evil. And that's why, I've been unpacking this thing about the antenna nature and what do you need to consume, what do you need to eat that's going to balance you between the cosmological forces and the terrestrial forces and keep you as a vehicle for transmitting consciousness. Pardon me? Microgreens.
Algae.
Throwing yourself.
Yeah. So no, just to finish your question, I took masking tape, put it on my skin, looked at it under the microscope, and was seeing these little colored antennas, wires, growing in my body, and I had to battle it, through diet and nutrition. I had to go like really pure and find out what's going to work for me. But I also had to fight it on the electromagnetic level, because I'd get around electronic devices like my laptop, and these things would go nuts. They would come alive. They feed off of the signals. So the future is not friendly, as Tellus would try and brainwash us into believing. It's a battle. So, okay, let's move now into the section on nutrition and diet. And I meant to introduce this before the break, and you might have seen both Laura and I were working at the table there, testing people with different food substances. We were operating as high-end antennas, doing that. This is something called vibrational radiesthesia. And yeah, it works with pendulums like this, but it's not the same as your usual dowsing practice that you might see people doing, which is more mental dowsing. You ask a question, what's the answer, yes or no, spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. This vibrational radiesthesia comes out of the training I did in biogeometry. I did the advanced training a few years ago with this biogeometry was started by Dr. Ibrahim Karim, who, not so surprisingly, is from Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, where a lot of this science of shape and vibration originated from, being passed down from the Atlanteans. And so he's developed this new science of biogeometry, which is bringing back the subjective experience in scientific work that our current scientific model cuts out, where everything has to be objective and the human is cut out of the equation. Well, we know that you can't cut the human completely out of the equation. That's an impossibility, and they know that, but they don't want to let go of this scientific methodology that kind of gives them, some cred. Scientism, exactly. But Dr. Karim and others are realizing, we need to bring in the subjective experience, which is to say you are an antenna that can receive signals and information. And working with pendulums like this just is an extension of my own antenna-ness to help me to see visually what's going on. So at the table there with a few of you, and I'll do this after we finish too, anybody wants to stay and get tested, we went through a variety of food substances using a particular ruler, the Turin ruler, where I could test the percentage of compatibility between your field and the field of the substance, using this as an antenna. I would tune into each person's field individually, right? Because you're all individuals. I would tune in by increasing the string length gradually until I hit a connection and I got a strong spin, and then I would compare your field with whatever the substance is to find out what percentage on the ruler was compatible. So this is, I was setting you up for this in the first half when I was saying everyone's got an individual field. Everyone's got an individual path that they got to walk. So how are you going to know whether you should be vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, pegan? There's a new one, pegan now. It's paleo-vegans. And or good old omnivore, right?
All meat vegan.
Like I'm a vegetarian some days of the week. Other days of the week I'm a humanitarian. Do you know what what do humanitarians eat? Human. Yeah. So we're going to be looking at the four different groups, the four different groups that need to work together to sustain this complex nature that we are as individuals. So protein, first of all, and then oils and fats, and then the salts and the mineral world, and then finally the starches and sugar. And to get a little peek at what each of them offers, from a spiritual perspective. So the protein, actually interestingly enough, comes from the Greek word proteos, which means the first, or the most important, or the main building block. you've got to have the protein as your main building block, and then these other things can work with that main building block of proteose in the secretion, the excretion, and the accretion. And the protein, because it's in movement, it's in constant movement of secretion, excretion, and accretion, has to be renewed daily, right? So we need to have protein on a regular basis, unless you're fasting, because that's the basic building block of the landing pad. You know, we talked about being an antenna. We can also talk about it being a landing pad for the higher frequencies that want to come down the antenna, right? We literally have an energetic cord that goes up above the head, and there's chakras. We continue to have chakras up the head, just like different octaves on the piano. And the higher chakras handle the higher frequencies, and they need to step down. They step down through these transformers of chakras. And if you don't have the protein to be able to handle that, you're not going to be a landing pad for those frequencies. You're going to get blown away. You're going to get blown away by the vibration, the power of those things, and therefore you're not going to be able to walk with higher consciousness. So there's different sources. There's basically the two different sources of protein. There's the plant source and the animal source, and that's kind of where you get divided between being someone who's a meat eater or a vegetarian or a vegan. And it's interesting, the whole vegetarian movement has exploded in the last couple of decades, and a lot of people have jumped on, I don't want to use this word, but I will, the bandwagon. I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, Katie Lang, the Canadian singer, she made that comment about how meat stinks, and that really pissed off people in her province of Alberta, which is, the big beef capital of Canada, and she said meat stinks, and it pissed off the farmers, the cattle raisers, but it excited also a movement towards vegetarianism. Now it's interesting that spiritually, which way to go? Vegetarian, eat meat. The Dalai Lama, interestingly enough, he eats a lot of meat. He's a Tibetan. And actually his doctors say you've got to eat meat. Like he's a very busy man. He does a lot of work. He's traveling. He's lecturing. And so for his constitution, the way he was raised, culturally and all that, he's on a meat diet as prescribed by his doctors. But then you got someone like Rudolf Steiner. He was vegetarian. And he made the statement, for his lecturing and traveling and heavy work schedule, like he was a big kind of rock star celebrity lecturer back in the early 1900s, traveling around Europe, he said he couldn't do that on a meat diet. The meat diet would be too demanding on his constitution to do the work he was doing, because he was highly clairvoyant too, and he was doing a lot of spiritual scientific research. He's using his higher capacities. So for him, he didn't eat meat, and he talked a lot about he talked a lot about this subject because people were constantly asking him, do I need to give up meat to be spiritual? And he said it's better to eat meat than to think meat. If you're thinking about meat, then you're probably better to eat it. Something could be prompting you to eat it. But he does say, in the evolutionary trajectory of things, we are going to move away from being reliant on these other life forms to sustain us, to eating the flesh of animals. And in fact, to eat the flesh of animals does connect us more to the earth. It does create that link more to the earth, because animals have this horizontal nature, right? They're all like this, looking down, grazing, sniffing, chewing. So to take in their nature, including their astral body, it does bring our vision down more to the things of the earth, which may be what you need. It's more grounding, exactly. And we are needing to be working with the matter of the earth. Like, that is the great trajectory since ancient India. There's been this stepping down through Persia, and the Egyptians were building these big antennas and so forth. There's been an architecture, all that. There's been this turning to the earth and away from spirit, which is what alcohol does. Alcohol disconnects you from spirit and brings you down to earth.
Naturally.
Yeah, I mean, you think alcohol makes you like free and all kind of loose and sloshy, but think the next day how you feel. It's really like pounded your system, and you have a pounding headache, and you don't feel very connected because, yeah, you're putting poison into your system, which had its time, but now it's really counter evolutionary. So yeah, he didn't tell people, well, you should stop eating meat. He just gave them the facts about what it does to you, so that you can use it self-prescriptionally. Like, oh, maybe you need meat. Like, I was dousing people with some meat that I had in my freezer, people that are vegetarian here, and it's like, well, 100%, yeah, your body resonates high with this chicken. It resonates high with this soup bone. So, this vegetarian movement that has been growing the past few decades, it's got this philosophical side, it's got this idealistic side, which can, have a dark side to it. It can actually be undermining our capacity to hold consciousness if we're doing it from an emotional perspective or an ideological perspective, and so forth. I was vegetarian. I was pure vegetarian in my early 20s, and I became very ungrounded by it. My friends said I was just so heavenly minded, I was no earthly good. I was just like, so I had to get back to eating meat. But now I'm actually making slow steps to eat less meat. But it's funny how my life karma has been. I have met a lot of people that were vegetarian, and for some reason I was there on their path, and on their path as an empath, because I have an empath capacity, and it's like, I am getting tap on the shoulder that you should maybe think about eating meat. And so I became like a meat therapist. I would take their hand, I'd say, okay, we'll go find a nice restaurant, like a woman who wrote a book called Don't Have a Cow. I went out with her, and she had her first piece of meat in like a long time. Another woman that I did a macrobiotic cooking course with, she hadn't eaten meat, and she was like really ungrounded. She would eat sugar, and she'd just like blow off, like into outer space. And it's like, I took her out, and we went to a Japanese place and had some nice steak, and her consciousness just shifted. Another person had never eaten meat. Like, so it's just like, I didn't ask to be in that position, but somehow my empath side would wake up, and it's like, I think, yeah, you need to consider getting back on. And actually, Laura is another person on that path who I met a couple years ago, and she was going to share a little bit of her experience around this.
Okay. Yeah, so my experience, it actually started when I was younger. I had a parent who cooked meat, and I had violent reactions to it. So I would avoid actually eating meat. At first, not because of any ethical or moral reasons, but just mere physically having couldn't stay in my body. Like, within 5 minutes, I'd be running to the washroom and would be sitting there or kneeling for some time. And, doctors really didn't understand what was... I didn't go too much into it with the conventional or alternative system, but there wasn't too much of explanations other than, yes, sounds like you're allergic to meat. So I thought, I remember asking one of my parents, like, I want to eat more vegetables, and I'd have to... It was a struggle to get the meat down, like my body was not interested in it. So I kind of started to naturally go towards this vegetarianism this vegetarian approach, and then learned about all the moral and ethical reasons, once becoming a bit more of an adult and independent, living outside of the home. And then, found, I should detox, and so I detoxed, sugars and gluten and meats, and I never went back. It was, so at that point I was pretty strict vegan, extremely strict in fact. And then, while I was in those states, when I look back on myself, I see how my constitution was. And I see how ungrounded I was. I see how I was like a blade of grass just blowing in the wind. It's like when a big gust went, I was like, boom, and it would take me down for days. And I'd have to regain my strength to come back up into a vertical position. And yeah, as Jesse said, I was on that path, not really conscious, thinking I was doing the conscious thing by, not harming animals and all of these things. But the more I learned about the spiritual aspects and the energy, and that I'm not necessarily consuming just the physical properties of the food, but the energetic, the prana, I started to realize what I was deficient in, and I completely did a 180. It took a while for me to warm up to the idea, because I was thinking, I'm not, that vegan, vegetarian because I have moral and ethical reasons. But it turns out when I opened the door that, in fact, I was quite opposed to eating meat for moral and ethical reasons. And I had some unconscious astral, sympathies and antipathies that I needed to overcome. And after my path of introducing meat and animal products in general, because I was strict vegan, so after including animal products back into my life, my constitution has changed drastically. I can feel myself benefiting from even the presence of an animal product in my life. I feel the energy, and I can get the nutrients from it. Sometimes it's like one bite of meat that's required. That's it. That's all it takes. And the amount of gratitude, and when you said redemption, that's exactly what it feels like, is that I get to redeem something within myself through redeeming another being. That is I am so deeply blessed by that, and I'm learning the grace of how to move with other beings in this world, and that like the bunny and the fox making a pact, I made a pact with them as well. But my pact, it changes on a daily basis. So gaining the tools to interpret what I'm needing in that moment is now that's what I'm on. That's the path I'm on. Not I'm going beyond my sympathies and antipathies, my thinking of it, and getting into the energy and what's happening with me when I introduce these things into my life, and when I'm having, when I have a deficit of something, and when there's a surplus of it. But I did get those taps, and I get those taps from meat and the animal, like the plant and the animal kingdom. So listening to the taps is a challenge. Hearing the taps and then listening to them.
The antenna. Something's coming down the antenna. I'm not here trying to sway anyone to eat meat, but really to just get the facts out there so that people, they're not being when it comes to vegetarianism, it's not that they're being a sheeple. You don't want to be, a sheeple about vegetarianism. You want to be doing it because it's what's coming down the antenna towards you. And just to finish off this little piece here, here's the pamphlet from the Weston Price Foundation, which is probably one of the most enlightened sources about consuming animal products. and debunking some of the myths around that. I've got a whole pile of their flyers on many different subjects. You can come and have a look if you want, or you can look at it online. And of course, yeah, they're saying it needs to be high quality, ethical meats and dairy products. But here's one on myths and truths about vegetarianism, and I won't. I'll just read what the myth is. All the hungry could be fed if grazing land were cultivated for crops, and it explains how that's not true. Meat consumption contributes to famine and depletes the Earth's natural resources. Apparently that's not true. Livestock is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Apparently not true. Beef production requires 2,500 gallons of water per pound of beef. Apparently that's not true.
Do they sell meat?
No.
What is the Western Price?
No, it's just Western Price was a dentist who lived back in the last century, and he went and looked at the diets of indigenous people, looking at their facial structure and their teeth and bones, and compared it with indigenous people who had changed their diets to a more Western thing, and saw how destructive that was. So no, they don't have any investment in making money off of these ideas. Yeah, vegetarianism protects against cancer. Not true. Eating meat causes heart disease. Not necessarily true. Causes osteoporosis. Not necessarily true. I like this one. Eating animal flesh causes violent, aggressive behavior in humans. I've seen it happen. We talked about fats and oils, and how fats and oils are necessary for the body, primarily as a source of warmth. They get used for other things, but I just want to focus on this importance of warmth for the body. That the body has what it needs to generate warmth and heat. And the reason why it's important from a spiritual perspective is because in order to, we produce physical warmth and have that healthy physical homeostasis, then allows us to have soul warmth, which is what makes life enjoyable, that we have soul warmth. We have soul warmth here, right? We're sharing warmth amongst our personalities in the circle, which then opens up the gate for spiritual warmth, which is bringing down the fire, the electricity, the higher frequencies, the spiritual warmth that will light us up. So physical warmth, soul warmth, and spiritual warmth, the three kinds of warmths. And if we don't have that physical warmth, we're not going to have the strength and constitution to have soul warmth, which will then invite spiritual warmth. Example of that is like going away. I was away last weekend and went up to a cabin that I get to occasionally, and it was stone cold when I got there. So I had to, first things first, I had to get physical warmth going. So I got the fire going. I got some food on the stove, some soup, to warm myself physically. And then I got the soul warmth going. I got some music happening and some writing, generating soul warmth. This kind of froth of warmth. And then what results out of that in terms of spiritual warmth? Presence. Presence lands. Quality of space landed in the cabin there. So, yeah, it all comes down to fats and oils, having the proper amount in your diet. So the question is around, the source for that, because, there's plant fat that you can get, which is kind of ironic because plants are not a warmth organism. There's no warm-blooded plants like warm-blooded animals, right? A plant is not a warmth organism, so how do we get something from a plant that produces warmth in us? Well, the warmth aspect of the plant is on the periphery, right? The sun. Sunlight is the warmth body of a plant. something coming from the periphery, and a plant will take it in through its leaves. That's where the oils actually get produced in a plant. During the day, through the photosynthesis and whatnot, the oil is generated in the leaves, and then at night, when the sun's not there, the oil gets sent to the other parts of the plant. That's when it gets sent up to the wheat germ, or into the fruit of the plant, like the avocado, or the sunflower seed. It's sent from the leaf up into the seed, and so that's where we get the oil from the wheat germ, the sunflower seed, the avocado fruit. But we can also get oils and fats from animals. And here's a quote from Rudolf Steiner regarding this, because I did a lot of research. I've got his book on nutrition, and one of his students, The Essentials of Nutrition, and he spoke extensively on nutrition. He said plant fat does not go beyond the intestine, because it's completely broken down in the intestine. However, the fat contained in meat crosses over into the human being. When people eat animal fat, it is not completely destroyed. This means an easing of nutrition. But whoever brings forth forces to nourish themselves from plant fat will thereby gain more inner forces. So what he's saying is it's harder to get it out of plants. Your body will have to work more, but by virtue of the fact that it has to work more, it'll gain more. But you have to have the strength to access it to begin with. So for someone who's very sick or weakened, and for them to expect to get the fats and oils to produce warmth, which will produce health and all of that, just going on plant stuff isn't going to necessarily do it. That's why people, the chicken soup penicillin, it's the Jewish recipe, getting the fat out of the chicken is going to support you more. Now let me just mention milk for a second, because milk is not flesh. You're not eating an animal when you drink milk. Milk is a primal and universal food. It's something that we all get, right? You're born, and hopefully you were breastfed and got your mother's milk. There's nothing wrong, according to Rudolf Steiner. He really praises milk as a universal and primary food to sustain humans. And I know people say, well, like only humans would drink milk from another species. Like you would never have a goat drinking from a cow, or a donkey drinking from a sheep. But that's part of the. I hear that and I go, well, that's one of the beauties of being human, is that you can actually access what you need from other species, from their milk. And I think this is some of the adaptogenic nature of foods. I love that word, adaptogenic. It means the substance will supply what you need. It'll adapt to your needs. And I think we don't understand, we don't live by that enough, realizing that your body has wisdom. It'll drive what it needs out of it. If you have a positive attitude as well, and you believe in that, is helpful. That's why I played that song. You got to have faith, 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 because faith really is, the ultimate power that's going to sustain us. But the thing with milk, you can't buy milk. You can buy stuff in the stores that they call milk. That's comes from, nobody knows where it comes from. It's all thrown together. Cows that are fed hormones and antibiotics and who knows what. And it's boiled. It's pasteurized. So much of the life in it is gone. So I thought I was allergic to milk, and I got off of dairy a number of years ago, until I went to a farm, and the farmer had raw milk, And I looked at it, and I looked at its aura, and it's like, whoa, there's some power in that thing. And I doused it, vibrational dowsing. It was like, yes. I've been drinking 3 or 4 liters of raw milk for the past 3 years. I'm not allergic to milk. I just am intolerant to the junk they sell in the stores. That was what was making me sick every time I drank it. It was like, ugh, pain. It's like upset stomach. I never get that. I crave it. I drink it before going to bed, and I am out like a baby. So, not surprisingly, there's a huge battle in Canada that's trying to restrict access to raw, unpasteurized milk. It's Michael Schmidt. You might have heard of him. He's been in the courts for over 20 years fighting this. We're the only G8 nation that doesn't allow the citizens access to milk straight from a cow. There's all this propaganda going out now how dangerous raw milk is and it has to be boiled. When I go get my milk out of the fridge, I open the cap and it pops because there's life going on in there. You don't get that when you open your jug of milk. You're not going to hear this pop of life because it's growing and alive.
Usually in a bag.
It's in a bag. Yeah. I get it right from the farmer. I've been to the farm. The cows are all pasture, and like anything, be it meat or milk, it should be grass raised on the pasture, not the GMO corn feed. Like, we're not getting real food in the stores. So this is where it's not easy to find out what you should be eating. You have to have your antenna on. Which takes us to the next thing I was talking about, salts. Salt in the mineral world. Most people are salt deficient. That was a big surprise to me when I learned this from one of my teachers. And you should be able to taste salt in your sweat. You know, if you take a little bit of sweat from your neck or wherever and taste it, it should have a little bit of a salty quality to it. And there again, it should be high quality salt that you're consuming, not the stuff from Windsor, which actually has sugar in it. It says right on the box, salt and sugar. Why? But salt is the thing that is anabolic, right? It builds up as opposed to the catabolic, which is the breaking down. So we need these salts. They're of the earth, and they actually serve the thinking. They serve this pole. They serve a building up of the brain and the nervous system and the capacity to think, to crystallize thought. And when we think, we're actually breaking down the brain and the nerve system, so it needs the salts and the minerals to be built up. Alchemically, which brings in kind of the spiritual side, this is the salt pole, and down here in this region is the sulfur pole. Right? And alchemy, there's the salt pole, the sulfur pole, and then the mercury pole. That mercury in the middle that mediates between the two extremes of salt, which is solid, and sulfur, which is volatile. Right? And that's what's happening down there. There's a lot of volatility down in the metabolic area. It's catabolic. It's breaking down. So, which leads us to the next thing, which is the starches and the sugars, right? Which is what feeds the sulfur fire, right? We burn off the starches, the carbohydrates, the sugars in the metabolic process. So, I like how this author put it, you know, like our relationship with sugar. Sugar is so powerful and at the same time so seductive that we either are worshiping it regularly in the way we consume it, or we're defaming it as some sort of false god. No. Yes. No. Yes. No. But sugar is very, very important in the system, because this is what, on a spiritual level, will mediate form into consciousness. It's what keeps the form moving and alive. The salt end, you know, from like hardening and becoming rigid, If you're like too salty, you're going to become contracted and rigidified, and your thought's going to be like black and white, narrow, dumbed down. The sugar enlivens the form, the movement of protein, so that consciousness can arise and exist. So Steiner makes the point that no other food substance than sugar brings us as close to the forces which activate and make a person human. Which is to say, yeah, without sugar we're not going to have the ability to be conscious human beings. I actually have a friend who's become addicted to drinking brake fluid. Yeah, he's drinking brake fluid. Like, we're really concerned about it, even though he's not. He says he can stop anytime.
Why? Why did you start?
Put him to
Yeah, he can stop anytime now. He's drinking brake fluid.
I'll break.
Had to inject a little humor in there.
Took a while.
It's alright, that kind of came out of left field, didn't it? So we hit those main areas: the protein, the oils and fats, the salt, minerals, and the starches and sugars. And looking at the pole, the salt pole, and the sugar, sulfur, and you might notice that I omitted to talk about vitamins. And I don't want to get into that whole field, because I think to be taking vitamin supplements in a way is just, we're acknowledging that our agricultural practices are not sustainable. That we're just leaching everything we can out of the soil and not putting it back in. And if we're eating food that's nutrient dense, we shouldn't have to be taking a lot of supplements. I will be talking about biodynamic agriculture more towards the spring, doing a spiritual science talk on that, about a form of agriculture that's even supersedes agricultural practices, that knows how to put not only the right terrestrial forces back into the soil, but how to invite the cosmological forces into the planet, into the food, so that it can go into you and sustain you as a cosmological antenna, the intelligence of the earth that we are meant to be. But just another point here, just before closing this down. The whole thing around food, it's in some ways we're just too focused on food as what's going to sustain us. And if you think about it, foods have different shapes and colors. And if we're going to wean ourselves eventually off of such a dependency on these lower forms, we should be deriving from them more than just the substance. We should be feeding ourselves with color. We should be feeding ourselves with form, which is what I do in one of my practices, Tantra practices. They're on the wall there. I have these different colored shapes that I meditate on and get fed from. I derive, they're portals to other dimensions, energy dimensions, that I can bring into my subtle bodies to feed, sustain, maintain. And that's where we're headed. And that's why I like to wear colorful clothing, because you have to look at me and you get to feed off the color, the vibration of the color. I don't wear black very often because black's not a color. There's no black in the rainbow. Black is the complete absence of color, and it actually sucks life from things. So colors all have their own quality, personality, and vibration. So we should be feeding ourselves with color and also shape. I have a lot of shapes. You notice? There's a lot of geometry in this loft that subconsciously it's affecting you. It's influencing you in a particular way. It's affecting your form. So hopefully it's a better vehicle for consciousness. So to close down, how do you know what to put into your body? I read recently how at the oracle of Delphi in ancient Greece, above the temple, it said, "Know thyself." It said, "Know thyself" over one entrance, and over another entrance it said, "In all things moderation." That is the wise maxims that come from that ancient spiritual teaching. That we need to know ourselves. We need to know for ourselves what is best for our body, and then to not exceed the moderation around that. Which is why I encourage you to develop your antennaeness to learn how to do vibrational radiesthesia, this form of dowsing, and Laura and I will both offer to do that afterwards if you want, anyone who wants to be tested with different food substances, to get the real information, what your body is good with. And then lastly, bless your food. That's got to be one of the most important things, whether you're eating at McDonald's or eating at the best vegetarian restaurant in town. Bless the food, because you as a human being are part of the equation. From being the farmer to being the consumer, your attitude of gratitude is going to be an influence on the spiritual nature of that food. Blessing food definitely has an effect on it. So why not bless something that you're about to run through the chute of your body to absorb goodness? You're going to absorb back that blessing energy that you put into it. And you got to have faith, faith, faith.